Hail and farewell. Those words differed from village to town to city across this nation today. So did the languages around the globe. But that was the heartfelt meaning that came from all of the Western world and much of the Eastern Bloc as we paid our final respects to John Fitzgerald Kennedy, our 35th president. And in the noble tradition of our democracy, another man already had greatness thrust upon him, the presidency of the United States.
ABC News presents a special report on the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
Lyndon Baines Johnson took the oath of office as the 36th President of the United States at 3:39 Friday afternoon, less than 2 hours after President Kennedy's death at the hands of an assassin. The oath was administered by federal judge Sarah T. Hughes, an old friend of the Johnson family, aboard Air Force One at Love Field, Dallas. His first official order as president was, "Let's get airborne." The grim voyage back to Washington took but 2 hours. The walk from plane side to the waiting microphone took but 2 minutes. They seemed infinitely longer. The nation and the world were waiting for the first public words of the new President of the United States. And when he was ready, they were a prayer that he be allowed to do his best and a plea for help from God and from his countrymen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
It is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God.
Here now is ABC News correspondent Bob Young.
Lyndon Baines Johnson was born near Johnson City, Texas, founded by his grandfather on August 27, 1908. He was the oldest of 5 children. He received his degree from Southwest Texas State Teachers College in 1930 when he was 21. For the next 2 years, he taught debating and public speaking, and then he went to Washington. By 1935, he caught the fancy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who appointed him Texas Director of the National Youth Administration. And in 1937, he won his first term in Congress. And in 1938, the young congressman from Johnson City photographed with the highest-ranking Texan in Washington, Vice President John Nance Garner from Uvalde, Texas. He was reelected without opposition to his next term, as well as the one after that, in 1940, when he attended the Democratic National Convention in Chicago with Senator Tom Connally and Elliott Roosevelt. In 1941, he was called to active duty as a commander in the Navy Reserve. He was awarded the Silver Star in the South Pacific, but in 1942 found himself a civilian again on active duty as a congressman.
Commander-in-Chief ordered all members of the House and Senate on active duty with the Army and Navy to return to their congressional posts. I received that order while on temporary duty on the staff of General Douglas MacArthur in Australia. If every soldier and sailor serving in the South and Southwest Pacific area could send his personal message home, I think it would be something like this. I want every admiral and every general and every other military leader. I want the various secretaries and bureaucratic officials that work in Washington today, before they retire tonight, to engage in a little introspection and ask themselves this question: have I, by indecision, have I, by procrastination, have I, by indulging in red tape, slowed down production? Have I contributed to the fights going on between blocks, farm blocks against labor blocks, management blocks against workers blocks? If I have, I resolve tomorrow to cut it out. I'm going to fight. I am going to act with the same courage, with the same intelligence as if I were out in those bombers over New Guinea today.
Who is Lyndon Baines Johnson? Well, Senator Johnson once tackled that question himself. I am, he said, a free man, an American, a United States Senator, and a Democrat, in that order. I am also a rancher, a businessman, a consumer, a parent, a voter, and not as young as I used to be or as old as I expect to be. And I am all of those things in no fixed order. A long description, and yet, incredibly, it lacks the single word that most others would put first: politician. William S. White, the famous journalist, once called Johnson the very embodiment of the traditional definition of politics as the art of the possible. Senator and Vice President Johnson practiced that political art on the hustings.
I have never questioned the patriotism or the integrity of my friends who subscribe to another political faith. But even the most rock-ribbed Republican must admit that his party responds a little bit faster to the fat cat than it does to the folks. Under the Republican administration, we have lingered too long over the dessert, while a hungry and anxious and yearning world outside grows restless, its confidence in our great America already sadly shaken.
I speak to Negroes as Americans every day. I don't ever separate one group of Americans from another. If we can ignore the Bill of Rights and flaunt the Constitution and say that Senator Kennedy is qualified to serve his country in the House and the Senate and in the service, and break his back hauling his crew members out of the oily ocean to save their life, but he is not qualified to be president because he's a Catholic, then to follow that logic to its logical conclusion tomorrow, you could say that Governor Ribbentrop could not be governor because he's a Jew, or what would really be a national disaster, that I couldn't be a senator because I belong to a Christian church, or that someone else couldn't be a president because he was a Baptist or Episcopalian.
Johnson, the campaigner, gets some rest at home, but not much. His is the art of politics, and it's art for art's sake. So the LBJ Ranch near Johnson City is a political landmark. About 100 Hereford cattle populate the place, and so do steaks. Steaks for visitors from all over the world or nearby. And you can hardly avoid the LBJ handshake. Or better than that, the hearty handshake and that flag you saw, hoisted only when LBJ's in residence, and certain idiosyncrasies of dress earn him a reputation for flamboyance. But the guests seem to like it, and it is his way. Besides, he isn't always flashy. Sometimes he's conservative. And sometimes he's just plain comfortable in Texas attire. In any case, Lyndon Johnson is not likely to change his way of living, or wasn't likely until this week. First in 41, then in 48, the Johnson hat hit the senatorial ring. The second time, it stuck. A slim margin of victory, but Lyndon Johnson belonged to the United States Senate. He was 40, and few, with the exception, perhaps, of his family, could see how much he belonged. As Lady Bird and the children watched, he climbed the ladder. In 1951, he was Democratic whip. In 1953, majority leader. The next year, Johnson easily won re-election. In 56, he was a favorite son candidate for president from Texas. Bills passed when he wanted them passed, and they died when he wished them ill. In 57, under pressure for civil rights legislation, he persuaded the South to accept a mild measure as the lesser of two evils. It was the first civil rights law since Reconstruction. But politics was not always fraught with heavy burdens, not even with a tearful subject.
The men who know about plant life say the onion is the genus of the lily family. I'm prepared to believe this. We've been warned in literature of the futility of efforts to gild the lily. It would be just as futile to try to gild that pearl of the vegetable world, the onion, more specifically, the Texas onion. Each onion speaks eloquently for itself.
Nor was the senator's life untouched by such burdens. In the summer of 55, he is suddenly stricken with a severe heart attack.
Well, Senator, you look like you just won an election. Do you feel that good, sir?
Well, I feel pretty good. I'm going to feel better after 2 or 3 months in Texas. I'm going home to get a long rest, and I hope I'll come back refreshed and rejuvenated.
What are you going to do in Texas?
Well, the first 10 days I'm down there, I'm going to be on vacation. Then I'm going to get me a great big rocking chair and put on my front porch, and the rest of the time I'm just going to sit and rock and think. I hope to come back to Atlanta in December, and then to go out to Mayo's in Minnesota from Atlanta. And if the doctors give me the okay, I'll be back on the job in Senate when the Senate reconvenes in January.
In the meantime, no politics and on to the rocking chair.
Well, I wouldn't say that you could take politics completely away from me, but we'll have it as a minimum.
Good thing. Good thing. Well, good luck, Tom.
You know, it was almost 4 months ago that I was stricken with a heart attack. 3 days afterwards, Lady Bird came in my room, and I decided I'd better do a little detective work. And I said, honey, I don't think there's much use. The doctors don't think I've got 1 chance out of 10 to live, do they? And she said, oh, yes, they do. They think it's 50-50.
Johnson on the hustings and at home, Johnson and the Congress, now Johnson on the issues.
The objectives of the committee can be stated very simply. First, we're trying to determine the state of our nation's defenses. Second, we're seeking methods of stepping up the target dates of achievement in the entire missile program. The information already available to us indicates clearly that our target dates are far too modest. The President will find that the Democrats are ready to cooperate in building a foreign policy that will secure peace and freedom, and that we have no desire to either embarrass him or to usurp his powers, his constitutional powers as President and Commander-in-Chief. The American people want peace, and that should be the goal of all of us. The importance of this feat cannot be underestimated. It brings mankind closer and closer to an actual escape into space. It also should bring closer to us the realization that we must organize our potentialities as rapidly as possible to play our proper role in entering the new dimension that is opening up before us. I think reasonable men will propose reasonable amendments in the hope that we can achieve reasonable results.
Senator, what would you say about the eventual outcome of civil rights?
I think that the present bill, several amendments will be submitted to it, such as the amendment offered by Senator Anderson and Senator Aiken to strike from the bill Part 3. The amendment offered by Senator O'Mahony to ensure a jury trial. I expect to support those two amendments, and I think other improvements will be made in the bill as the Senate debates it from day to day.
Reasonable, that's a favorite LBJ word, and it undoubtedly describes the man. But it's hardly a full explanation of his gift. What exactly was that gift? William S. White is the author of The Citadel, an authoritative volume on the Senate and a close personal friend of President Johnson. Here is Mr. White in Washington.
Well, it seems to me, as I've known the new president, that his special gift is the capacity to communicate to others, particularly others in politics, a sense of national need on a given issue, plus an enormous power of personal persuasion with other people, which is to say he, I think, almost uniquely understands how to make consensus, which of course is another term for compromise, but I think generally rational compromise. He's enormously skillful in face-to-face negotiation with other people of power in particular. And I think perhaps that is, well, I'm quite sure in my own mind, that's his greatest and most powerful characteristic as a public man. This is not unique, this capacity, but in his case, it's tremendously extended talent in this area.
And that Johnson gift would lead to the White House, but not as directly as LBJ hoped. First, he must try for the Democratic presidential nomination.
I came out here 26 years ago following the old philosopher's advice, Horace Greeley, go west, young man, looking for a job. I found it. 26 years later, I'm back out here again. Looking for a job. And we're going to get it. And the vice presidency is a good place for a young man who needs experience. It's a good place to get that training. And I have never felt that I should say that I would not accept any duty from being a private to being a president that my country thought I ought to perform. But I think that an objective appraisal of my present job would indicate to most knowledgeable newspaper men that there's really more responsibility in the majority leadership and more opportunity to serve your country than there is in the vice presidency. That after all, our present vice president has been vice president 7 years and only had a chance to vote 7 times. And I voted more than that last week. And I don't have any desire whatever to say to vote for a gavel.
At first, it was all the way with LBJ. Candidates wheeled and dealed and fell to the wayside. But Lyndon was stubborn. He sought delegates with eloquence.
Program and the platform and the farm bill and what we're going to do for whoever's nominated this convention. But the one thing that you must take home with you if you take nothing else, the person you select is your president. His judgment, the responsibilities he's shouldered, the weight he's carried, the burdens he knows, the decision he makes may well determine whether you live as free men or whether you die as slaves.
Just as in the Westerns, there was a showdown. John F. Kennedy came to the Texas delegation. His voice on this film is distorted, but his words and style are unmistakably true to the man.
True that Senator Johnson made a wonderful record in answering those forum calls, and I want to commend him for it. I was not present on all those occasions. I was not majority leader. As Lyndon knows, I never criticized. In fact, on every occasion, I said that I thought Senator Johnson should not enter the primaries, that his proper responsibility was as majority leader, and that if he would let Hubert and Wayne and I settle this matter, we could come to a clear-cut decision. So I come to you today full of admiration for Senator Johnson, full of affection for him, strongly in support of him for majority leader, and I'm confident that in that position, we're all going to be able to work together. Thank you.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy prevailed, and then in tones rather lacking in vigor, he asked for a Texan running mate.
After discussions with all elements of the Democratic Party leadership, I have reached the conclusion that it would be the best judgment of the convention to nominate Senator Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas for the office of Vice President. His long experience dates back to the administrations of Franklin Roosevelt. On 4 separate occasions, he has been chosen unanimously by his Senate colleagues for the Democratic leadership of that body. He has earned the endorsement of all 50 states through his vigorous and positive leadership. I have said on many occasions that in these days of great challenge, Americans must have a vice president capable of dealing with the grave problems confronting this nation and the free world. We need men of strength if we're to be strong, and if we are to prevail and to lead the world. Lyndon Johnson has demonstrated on many occasions his brilliant qualifications for the leadership we require today.
I neither sought nor solicited that statement, that recommendation, or anyone's support for Vice President. As I have said so many times, I do not think that any man has a right to refuse to serve his country if he is convinced he can serve his country.
Here, ladies and gentlemen, is a man who can unify, a man who can get things done, a man who can win with Jack Kennedy in November. Ladies and gentlemen of the convention, I proudly and confidently place before you as the next Vice President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas.
I know when I see political genius, and I have seen it in my friend John F. Kennedy. The Democrats of this nation are going all the way with JFK.
Why? Why did the strongest majority leader in modern times forsake his beloved political art for a cul-de-sac? ABC's Bill Lawrence asked him.
How did you happen to run for the vice presidency?
Well, Bill, after I was defeated for the presidency at Los Angeles, I got my first good night's sleep in several weeks, and the next morning, the nominee for president, Mr. Kennedy, called me, and we had a meeting, and he asked me to go on the ticket. I considered it, talked to many of my friends, recognized that there were only 2 offices in the land which all the people had a choice, and I felt that it offered a good opportunity, that it would be quite a challenge, that it would be a different experience for me, that my friends thought it would be good for the party and the country, and I express my willingness to accept the nomination and the convention nominated.
Still, Mr. Vice President, as majority leader, you had developed a glowing reputation as a wheeler and dealer in the best political sense of those terms. Did you not feel that this was a come down somewhat, your present post?
No, I felt it was a different type of assignment, but actually I felt that it offered opportunities that I had really never had before in either my service in the House or the Senate. I have never felt that the vice presidency had come down from anything except the presidency. Senator Kennedy has been one of the greatest experiences of our life. We now look forward to sharing with him a partnership of service to America and service to the world, an administration that pledges itself to working for the greatest good for the greatest number. Lady Bird and I are grateful to all of the people in more than 40 states who came out to meet us and to hear us and to judge us. We appreciate a wire we just received from President Eisenhower, which says the American people have spoken. Congratulations and best wishes on your victor as Vice President-elect, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
The Speaker of the House of Representatives will now administer the oath of office to the Vice President-elect.
The beginning of the changing of the guard. One Texan to another. The bald-headed Mr. Rayburn.
After me, I, Lyndon Baines Johnson,
I, Lyndon Baines Johnson,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all
What thoughts
enemies,
must have coursed the mind of this ambitious man, this affable man, as he stood there before his old friend, Sam Rayburn, becoming in a nonce the Vice President of the United States. Lyndon Johnson had wanted to be president, and for once he was settling for second best. What irony the events of recent days have settled on this man.
any mental reservation whatever.
I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter, so help me God.
That I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God.
Lyndon Baines Johnson's sentiments were mixed on that bleak January day almost 3 years ago. He has managed to fill the time since with an unquestioned enthusiasm for his job. President Kennedy soon had him off on a series of goodwill missions, such as this one in Tehran. It was just the kind of task the supercharged Texan with a friendly smile liked best. His 23 years in politics were grounded on the warm handshake and the all-encompassing wave of the arm. But he was more than an instrument of simple goodwill. The young president trusted Johnson with grave diplomatic assignments as well. He was a fact finder at the highest level, probing chiefs of state like the Shah of Iran, gathering the facts upon which the administration built its Middle Eastern policy. Another mission might find Mr. Johnson with the task of ironing out little-known wrinkles which had cropped up in one of our overseas embassies. He was famous for getting things done as a senator, and he built on that reputation when he moved into the administration. If dreams of further political glory burned deep in the heart of Lyndon Johnson, he never showed it to official Washington. With the events of last Friday, it seems unlikely that Johnson or any future American president, for that matter, would engage so openly in scenes like these. A tour of a bazaar in Turkey, Johnson sharing with President Kennedy the personal joy of mingling with throngs of people. Irrepressible and determined as he is, worried Secret Service men can be expected to have their hands full in the future in protecting this gregarious, warm-hearted son of the Texas political wars. Happy as he was in this kind of goodwill assignment, Johnson fared well as President Kennedy's personal envoy on scores of critical missions. In Berlin, just after the infamous
West
wall.
Berlin. But my wishes are also directed to the people
living behind the barriers of brick and barbed wire erected by men who have no real conception of human freedom.
Later, when the question of our maintaining troops in Germany came up, Vice President Johnson was dispatched to assure the German leader, Konrad Adenauer, that America would guarantee Western Europe's military security. Dealing with troubled allies became another of the Johnson trademarks, and like Vice President Nixon before him, he was fully briefed on foreign policy. In India, the Vice President took his family along for a goodwill mission. The famous Johnson plain touch in a talk to simple Indian villagers.
Can there be more worthy ambitions? Can there be in all the world more laudable goals than the goal to see every mother's child healthy? Than the goal to see every mother's child where he can read and write? Than the goal to see the father and mother of every family having all the food they need for their stomachs and all the clothes they need for their bodies, and a roof over their head to protect them from the sun and the rain. Yes, I have seen here today the problems that we had in the little farm where I grew up 50 years ago. Here today, I see some of the poor who are living like I live and who are as poor as I was 50 years ago. But because a great president came along, my country has had a chance to advance. And now we want to help others to advance too. And when I go back, I'm going to tell him that I know, because I have looked into their eyes and seen what is in their hearts. I know that India is a friend of the United States of America. So thank you for asking me to come here with my family, my wife, and my party. And together through the years, we will remain strong and we will be partners. And we will work together to protect and defend what we have, and to move forward and to advance and to make this world a better world for our children than it has been for us. Thank you very much.
ABC's John Ralston was with him.
Mr. Johnson's handshaking and Texas-style politicking among the Asian street crowds has, from every indication, had the good effect he believes. Not only have the crowds been impressed by this demonstration of American friendship, but perhaps some of their leaders, too, have been influenced in the direction he intended, to get closer to their own people. And Mr. Johnson has carried this Texas-style politicking into the diplomatic meetings themselves. From all we can tell, it's had a good effect on these Asian leaders. Not every country has been fully satisfied with what the Vice President had to offer. Many difficult problems are left for the future. But he has emphasized that he is here to learn as well as to provide answers. And as the Kennedy administration formulates its new approach to Southeast Asia, to the underdeveloped countries generally, to neutralism, and to communist guerrilla tactics, it seems quite clear that the Vice President in Asia has learned very much that will be helpful.
The new president brings great personal assets to his new job, not the least of which is an attractive girl he married 26 years ago. Lady Bird Johnson tells about her experiences traveling with her husband, the then vice president.
I've been seeing what the women were doing in the countries that we visited. 6 countries consisting of 28,000 miles in 12 days. I think probably my purpose in going along was to serve as an extra pair of eyes and ears to learn and absorb the country, and particularly the women's activities, and tell Lyndon what I had seen. And also, in a way, to indicate to the people of the countries where we were that in our country, women did participate in the activities of government and in their husbands' lives.
What sort of thing have you been able to find out about the woman's role in these societies? These are, after all, societies in which woman's role has not been very elevated in the past. Is that not so?
Certainly, and in many of the villages in India, in Pakistan, in many of the lands, we would still see many women with veils over their faces. Maybe we would walk into a little village in India and be greeted only by men and boys. And only about the end of a long village street, we would begin to encounter a few girls and women. And then gradually, by the time we'd leave, they'd be swarming around. What I found, John, was overall was a world on the move, an upsurge of all the people. And in regard to the women, an emergence, which was just real gratifying.
Well, would you say then, in sum, that your impression is more, is one of encouragement from what's happening? I mean, despite the problems and despite the poverty and the great difficulties, did you come away with a feeling that there is progress being made in general?
Mr. Robson, I certainly did. I seemed to sense a feeling of surge and determination that was real gratifying, although on all sides of it, anybody with eyes was bound to see the enormity of the problems when you walk down those village streets in India and multiplied that village by millions and millions, amounting to, what was it, 450 million in India, or something like that. You knew that the odds were heavy, but the spirit is abroad in the land, and the people are fighting their way upward. And
I've heard you quote a toast along this line. Would you quote that for us?
I think one of the most thrilling little group of words I ever heard, the Vice President of India made a toast at dinner as we were sitting in this hall of the Viceroys, where our group had dinner with him, with lines like this: "Where danger is nigh, so also is salvation," which is sort of the spirit you have to keep with you if you.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Johnson.
Two other pretty young women figure heavily in LBJ's personal life. One of them is along on a trip to Turkey. ABC's Sid Lazard covered that trip.
One of Vice President Lyndon Johnson's greatest assets on this tour he's making through the Middle East is a pert, lanky brunette by name of Linda Bird, who, it so happens, is his daughter. Hardly 18, but as suave a political lady as anyone could hope to find, Linda has been of incalculable aid to her father in selling America to the men and women of Lebanon, Iran, Turkey, Cyprus, and Greece, the countries the Johnsons have visited so far. Linda's contributions to her father and country during this hectic voyage have been manifold. First of all, she's shaken hundreds, perhaps thousands of hands, and she claims that she's developed a grip like a steel trap, but nothing, of course, like her father's. As a public speaker, Linda's also proved quite adept and often follows LBJ on the rostrum, although her speeches tend to be somewhat shorter and considerably more original than his. When Linda is not hobnobbing with the crowds, she visits, often in the company of her mother, specialized agencies such as this center here in Turkey, where Turkish women make clothing for soldiers. Each of Linda's days during this tour has been filled to bursting with such activities, plus dozens of teas, lunches, and dinners. Consequently, at night, her feet are pretty sore and her back just a little achy. Nevertheless, Linda told me that she wouldn't have missed this show for anything. And I believe her, because somewhere in her bloodstream courses that Johnson affinity for the Barnum and Bailey spectacle that is the life of a big politician.
Personal glimpses of themselves as the first family of the land, but we do have some solid insight into what we can expect from the new chief executive. Perhaps no clearer indication of the reliance placed in the Vice President by his former chief is to be found than in this statement after Mr. Johnson returned from the Geneva Conference.
A great public service. There are members from both parties here today to greet him. There were members of both parties in his group going around the world. This was an American effort to indicate our great concern for the cause of freedom in significant and important countries around the world. So, Vice President, we're glad to have you back. We don't quite understand why all of you should look so well, for those of us who are here resting look so pale, but nevertheless, we're glad to have you back, and we appreciate very much what you did.
Political enemies in 1960, Kennedy and Johnson became warm associates in the years which ensued. One touching indication came earlier this year when Pope John died. The Vice President, a Protestant, was sent as our envoy to the funeral. And those who knew the situation say that President Kennedy was grateful to Johnson for helping to lay to rest America's traditional doubts about a Catholic in the White House. Vice President Johnson was and is perhaps the best informed high official in Washington on questions of space exploration and its military applications. It was an interest he carried over from his days as a senator, and one that he can be expected to carry into the White House. One observation has it that, if there was any doubt about an all-out American effort to reach the moon by 1970, those doubts were put to rest by the tragic incident of last Friday. Lyndon Johnson, as shown in this visit to Rice University Space Center last year, is a relentless supporter of the space program. Many are asking about the attitude of the new president, a Southerner, on civil rights questions.
Not with merely a compassionate interest in motivating young Negroes to prepare themselves for advanced careers, we have a real national interest in doing so. The manpower needs of the next quarter century must be met if America is to retain its leadership for freedom in the world. The nation cannot be both ignorant and free. It never has, and it never will be. We just cannot afford to waste our human resources. We will not have the kind of society we want to have if large segments of our population are underprepared for the opportunities which will be open and accorded to them. So when we talk of motivation, we're basically talking of faith. The task before all of us, before you in this conference, before the industrial leaders of the nation, before the leaders of the unions, and certainly before the public officials of our land, is how to inspire the younger members of non-white groups in our society to have faith in the capacity and the will of their beloved land to move forward in the realms of social progress and justice.
The man, Lyndon Baines Johnson, has been in the public eye for a quarter of a century, yet most Americans feel that they really don't know this man. He has a kind of guarded personal aura about him, common to many public officials, which seldom breaks down, as it did in this off-the-cuff address to his alma mater, Southwest Texas State Teachers College.
When I went into the dark streets of Saigon, my Secret Service men had cables from our intelligence people saying that you must be very careful and not get out of your car and be surrounded completely with security people and never shake hands, because this is a very dangerous period. 14 were killed in this town last night. 4,000 mayors and city officials have been killed in this area this year. And I said, if they don't want me to speak to them and to talk with them, then let's don't go. Because I want to know them, and I want them to know me. I want to know Asia, and I want Asia to know America. And I have learned in my limited experience in this world that you can usually look into a person's eyes and see what is in his heart. And I want them to look into my eyes and into the eyes of the United States of America. We tore the big Air Forces signs off of our plane and just painted Old Glory. We tore the United States military air transport sign down, and we just put United States of America in our 707 jet. And we looked into their eyes, and we think they could see what was in our heart, because they came in thousands and tens of thousands with surge forward like an Atlantic wave, just to touch the hand of someone from America. Just with the hope that maybe, perhaps, somehow, some way, their little child could get rid of the tapeworms in his stomach and could have a chance that only 1 out of 10 there now have of getting in a school. And I'll tell you that after 2 or 3 or 4 days, we not only looked in their eyes and saw what was in their heart, but we instilled in them a determination to climb and climb and climb until they reached the top of the hill so that their children could have a school, and their children could have food, and their children could have clothes on their back. I came back to Washington, not distressed, not discouraged. I came back strong in the belief that when people know each other, they understand each other. And if they understand each other, they don't need to fight each other.
Was Lyndon Johnson ready to assume the American presidency, often called the toughest job in the world? That question occurred to reporter Bill Lawrence on a happier day when the current tragic situation was considered strictly academic.
It's often been said that Mr. Truman, with only this very brief period in the vice presidency, felt himself totally unprepared for the presidency the day it suddenly came to him, that he was not informed about such important matters as the atomic bomb, about some of the political arrangements that have been made with our allies abroad. I take it that this has had a happier change now, and that you do feel informed, consulted, and prepared if the day should come quickly when you might have to become the president yourself.
I think that's a correct statement, Mr. Lawrence. President Kennedy and the members of his staff and his cabinet have given me every opportunity to be aware of all the important decisions that have been made and to participate in them and to make any recommendation I cared to make. And I have been a party to those decisions, some important ones. The deliberations in connection with the invasion of Cuba, and again last October when we had the missile crisis in Cuba. We had some 35 National Security Council meetings, meetings of the Executive Committee of the Security Council, which I was a member. And I participated in all but one of those meetings. My recommendations were asked and received, considered, and in both instances, and I was a party to both decisions.
Go ahead,
Mr. Vice President, you've made...
Although I want to make it abundantly clear that the responsibility is with the President, and the President made the decision and accepted the responsibility for it.
Nothing more influenced President Johnson's character on his road to maturity than the men and women with whom he grew up and who have been his lifelong friends. How do those who know him best explain this man? Hugh Hill of ABC News spent today in Johnson City.
It's 12 o'clock noon in Johnson City, Texas, the county seat of Blanco County. This is the very hour that John Fitzgerald Kennedy is being buried in Washington, D.C. This is the hometown of the new president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Johnson City was named after his forebears, and he loves this town. He was raised here as a boy and lived until early manhood. And ever since, he's come back very often to visit old friends. And his old friends love President Johnson. Mr. R.E. Stubbs, Jr. is the local banker in Johnson City. Mr. Stubbs, you go way back in your recollection of Lyndon Johnson, don't you?
Yes, sir, that's correct. Our families were friends, and I've known him all of his life.
He always maintained his roots in Johnson City, didn't he? He always came back.
Yes, sir, he loved to come home, like all of us hill country boys. Every opportunity that he had, well, he'd run by Johnson City and spend the night or stay a while, or whatever time he had.
Why do you think he did that?
This country just seems to have some way of making people want to come home. They want to come back to the hill country.
When the president comes back home to the hill country, he can be found at the LBJ Ranch, 15 miles from Johnson City. He raises Hereford cattle, and his barbecues for the local gentry are said to be the best parties in the state of Texas. He loves to play host to his friends in Blanco County. But dignitaries from around the world have visited him at the ranch. President Kennedy was here just after he was elected in 1960. Conrad Adenauer was a visitor to the ranch and marveled at its beautiful setting with the gnarled old oak trees. Just outside the ranch is a plot of ground where President Johnson's parents and grandparents are buried. The president buried his father, Sam Johnson, in 1937. And his mother, Rebecca Baines Johnson, in 1958. The president moved into Johnson City when he was 6 years old. He's having the old homestead remodeled. A new cedar fence surrounds the property. President Kennedy graduated from Johnson City High School in a class of 6. Mrs. J.B. Leonard is superintendent of schools in Johnson City, and she was a classmate of President Johnson. Mrs. Leonard, I understand you used to have debating teams in high school.
Yes, I think perhaps our class was very interested in debate, and partially due to the fact that Lyndon's mother was quite a help to us. She trained the interscholastic league speech activities, and we gathered at their home many times to prepare debates, and she inspired us all to be more interested in debating and speaking.
Well, then, President Johnson's mother actually taught him elocution.
Yes, she did. She had a class of what was called elocution at that time. We call it speech now.
Was Lyndon good?
Very good.
Now, just behind you is a picture of the junior and senior class, along with a couple of teachers and superintendents. I know that you cherish this picture very much.
Yes, I do.
How did you happen to get it?
Well, we have it in the school. President Johnson gave it to the school when he was present for a graduating exercise in 1960. He was back again last year for a graduating exercise.
Is that right? Which one is Lyndon Johnson?
He's the fifth from the left on the top row right here.
He was a senior in high school.
Senior in high school.
What sort of student was Lyndon Johnson?
Well, he was a good student. He, I suspect, like most boys, could have been better had he worked harder at the job. But he was a real good student.
Did you go all 4 years together?
Yes, we did.
The schoolhouse burned down, didn't it?
Yes, it burned in 1944. This is a picture of the old school building where we graduated. And President Johnson had this reproduced last year and presented it to each member of the graduating class. His caption is, "Education is the keynote of the nation."
President Johnson's roots are deep in Texas soil, and the citizens of his hometown believe it will serve him well. This is Hugh Hill, ABC News, Johnson City, Texas.
President Johnson has always repaid in full measure the affection and the respect which his neighbors have heaped upon him. It is these twin qualities, affection and respect which enhance his commencement address to the class of 1961 at Southwest Texas State Teachers College, his own alma mater, delivered shortly after his return from an Asian tour for President Kennedy.
The President, upon my recommendation as chairman of the Space Council, sent a message to the Congress 2 days after we got back. He said that he was sending it and asked me, said, do you think that the timing of it is about right? And I said, yes, I think the timing is very excellent. But when I came to this town 30 years ago, and President Roosevelt had something that really meant a lot to the people, he would take that message and he would walk down Pennsylvania Avenue himself and look straight in the eyes of that Congress and give it to them in person. And the President said he thought that was a good idea, and he did. And as a result, I think the people in the Congress are going to support it. And that message calls for new frontiers, new vision. It calls for us taking the steps now that will make us no longer second in space and in science. It lays the predicate and the foundation for a space communication satellite that will permit the people of the world to see one television program at the same time throughout the world. Think about that kind of communication, and think about the opportunity that will provide. It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world. It lays the predicate for the steps that are necessary to send a man to the moon. It lays the steps that are necessary to provide a nuclear rocket that will produce benefits that are so unlimited that I couldn't tell you about them if I had all afternoon. But that's the kind of a world that you're living in. Oh, if I could have seen when I was graduating here 30 years ago that I would leave Washington with my wife and go around the world in 14 days and spend more than 100 hours in conferences with heads of state during those 14 days. It was beyond my greatest expectations, my fondest dreams. And yet, I was graduated into a somewhat backward civilization. So your opportunity is great. Your resources are unlimited. Your challenge is there. I always said if I could have had a boy, I would have wanted him to be a preacher or a teacher or a doctor or a politician. Because you get a sense of achievement from doing things for others, for helping make this a better world that you don't get in $5 bills. You've got to have them to take care of Molly and the babies and the house rent and the utilities. But the thing that makes life worth living is the satisfaction that you have reached down and helped somebody that was crippled walk again. Just think of the two countries that I went into. One was Pakistan, where our education is less than 15% of the children in school. And we planned a television station there that would go on at 8 in the morning and go off at 4 in the afternoon. That would just teach them, can you see May? Will, can you see May? Just the primer stuff. Because 85% of them are not in school at all. But from Pakistan, I'd come from Mosul. And there, 98% of theirs were in school. And I brought the two together and told done what the other had done. And that's the kind of a world that you're graduating into. All because you happen to be lucky? Yes, that's a part of it. All because you have a free system? Yes, that's a part of it. But primarily because you're what you are, and your daddies and your granddaddies are what they were. They were not content to just have a little freedom for themselves. They wanted it for everybody. And I cannot understand other nations that can enjoy the liberties and blessings of freedom themselves and not be concerned with it for other folks as well. So I said to your beloved congressman, coming down here today, the best this district ever had, Homer Thornberry, and that's something for me to say because I served here a long time myself, and I never have been noted for underrating my own capacity. But I talked to him about the glories that were out yonder on the mountaintop and how wonderful it must be to just become a college graduate and just get your sheepskin today because there's so many jobs for you to do. For your little 180 million people in this country in a world of 3 billion. And you are the affluent one. You are the knowledgeable one. You are the Christian one. You are the one that believes in the golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if they ask you what he said at your graduation address, you try to remember that he said that you were walking into a world of opportunity, not a world of obstacle. That you were a special missionary for democracy. That you loved freedom and liberty so much that you wanted everybody to have a little bit of it. And that you realized the principal enemies of freedom and liberty were illiteracy, impoverishment, disease. And that you in your own little way with your little sheepskin, regardless of how much they paid you per hour or per day or per week, if it was enough to sustain you were going out to make war on these things so that the peoples of the world could live in peace and prosperity.